can probably tell from my accent that I'm from the north of England, but I live in Essex. And the other thing that I've been working on in the studio and out and about is the different ways that I feel about where I came from, which is North Yorkshire, where I live now. And so on this part of the wall over here, in this section, this is a lot to do with my trips to the northeast, because I'm going to see my mother, who's in a home up there. So I have to visit, but of course I couldn't visit like we would like to visit, so we had to go in stages. And I've got a really good friend from school. I think I've known him since I was 5 years old. And I go and stay with him, and he's a terrific photographer, and we go for walks, and we talk about art and visual language and that. And I wanted to get back to where I started from. So we went to Saltburn Cliffs, because I was born in Saltburn, he lives there, and the cliffs in Saltburn are magnificent. And at low tide, you can go all around the underneath of the cliffs. And he and I talked about this concept of not looking at a view or looking at a landscape, but actually being in it. So we go right underneath the cliffs, right up close. And as a photographer, he has to kind of find these shots, and the camera does the work. But as an artist, you know, I'm in a position to actually manipulate how I feel about what I'm looking at, and so on. So we have works here to do with the cliffs around Saltburn, except strangely enough, this picture here, which is a little part of the North York Moors, where we also go walking. And we've talked on our walks about the fact that it's really difficult to photograph or paint the North York Moors because they're so picturesque that it's almost like you do a picture and it's just too beautiful, too twee. But I went up there in the winter because we had to try and find the slots where I could get into the nursing home with my sister or whatever. And I passed Holcombe Hole, which is a famous landmark up there, and suddenly I found a way to actually paint the North Yorkshire Moors, which is like this, and you can see there's lots of texture, not too many colours, quite stylized brush strokes, which are there to kind of represent the heather, which is really gnarly and everything. And they still burn the heather up there from time to time, you know, despite the fact that smoke is good for the heather. You know, the heather would die badly if they didn't burn it. So, you know, so we've got the smoke from the fire, which is, sometimes it looks like smoke, sometimes it looks like the clouds in the sky, and you know, I managed to work that gnarliness into the sky. So it's a landscape painting. It's also an abstract painting, and it's all about colour, brushstrokes, and so on and so forth. But this is an interesting thing, because this is where the curator actually showed me, anyway, her total and utter genius, because she saw to put this picture, which is not about cliffs, with these pictures about cliffs, because they were talking to each other stylistically or whatever. And so this relief here is called Salamis at Saltburn, which is a kind of a strange thing, but without sort of wishing to blow the pants off everybody, when I was little, we didn't have any books in our house. You know, there just weren't any books. So in order to access books, you had to go to the library. And Redcar had a wonderful Victorian library, no longer there, but it was absolutely gorgeous. And they had a children's section, and they had books on all the Greek heroes, you know, so you had Hercules, Perseus, Theseus, and everything. And they're the books that I read and this would be probably around about the age of 7 onwards. So they were kids' books. And that's why, you know, the idea that Theseus is a hero sort of sticks. And I've loved this ever since. And When I was up in Saltburn the last time, they'd had really terrific storms and everything, and it was just beautiful. But suddenly I kind of thought, I went back to kind of Greek history in my head. So Salamis, of course, is the battle between the Greeks and the Persians, a sea battle. The Greeks were heavily outnumbered, and they won. Yay for the Greeks. and that was another little bit of serendipity, because this just kind of turns up in my head without me thinking, but it kind of connects. You have these strange connections. But I think, I probably do need to go and see a psychoanalyst to get this sorted out. And this picture, on the other hand, is a contrivance, if you like. We have kind of references to the rocks with the seaweeds on it, stylized motion of the water, big areas which could be sand, could be cliffs, could be this, could be that, don't know. A little part of a boat which we came across actually at the mouth of the Tees and not at the cliffs at all, but it kind of had this wonderful shape, so I incorporated the shape from that. And then here, this can be read either as a surf line, or sometimes after storms you get kind of scumminess. Anyway, all put together. But I just find that when put together with the other works, it just lifts everything, and I absolutely love that. But the three together are absolutely fabulous for each other, I think. So this one is called The Calm After the Storm, and which leads me on quite neatly to sort of working methods, I think. In order to get the feeling of being in the landscape rather than looking at it, I will often use collage as a tool for drawing. I've got several of these, but this particular one, I just really loved it because it worked, on an artistic level for me. And I got lots of really interesting marks and connections and everything from the use of watercolour and ink and, tissue paper which will suck up watercolour, and then different kinds of paper which it just sits on the top. Nice little bit of tracing paper. Have to say, I nicked that from de Kooning. He used a lot of tracing paper in his drawings. And this one here, a particular favourite of mine, which I thought had a nice Japanese feel to it. I kind of kept thinking about Hokusai's Great Wave, and it was design, it was calm, and I really like that. And it turns up, the shapes turn up in the bigger painting, so that this would be done at home. It's card, it's ink, watercolour, and so on. Whilst these other two, this is a watercolour of the whole of Hoken, which is the burning of the heather at the other end, but this is kind of like the watercolour that precedes the oil painting. And because I absolutely adore watercolours, but not in the kind of traditional way. Often I can put them on quite opaquely or incredibly thin, and this is what is probably a sunset over the North Sea. But I hope that you can see the composition of it, because the composition of this turns up in an oil painting over there, of cliffs and sea again, and seaweed. Quite contrived in its rigidity, this one, because I wanted the vertical, I wanted the horizontal, and I wanted this dynamic shape down here. So this is studio work, but it's actually based on observations in the field, as it were. So that's kind of like the North Yorkshire seaside connections. There's some smaller works here. This is a drawing. This is an ink drawing of cliffs, and I think it shows off the way in which I like to draw things. This is called Cliffs and Cormorants. It's a watercolour. Don't normally like cormorants because I'm a trout fisherman, but when you're at the seaside, they're quite useful because you know that there's fish about, because I do go fishing when I go there as well. And then another calm after the storm watercolour with some of the wrecked bits of boats and lobster pots and everything that wash up underneath, you know, after a storm, and you can go down on the beach and everything. Now, I've got a really good friend who lives on the Isle of Lewis, an artist, and his wife Margaret, David Knight, and they've got this most beautiful studio, fabulous house and fabulous view. And I know Margaret and he will go down after a storm, and they've got the whole of the Atlantic in front of them, and they take all the bits and pieces and turn them into the most wonderful garden sculptures and protections from their flowers, because it's very windy. Absolutely beautiful. And yeah, it's just the seaside. I just love the seaside.